Hello guys, today we will be continuing our series on the Caro Kann defense, and the variation that we will discuss is called the Endgame offer variation of the Caro Kann. So without wasting any time, let's get into it. After e4, c6, knight to f3, d5, here white plays this move d3, which is a very interesting move. Now, an interesting fact about this variation is that black in the Lichess database actually scores quite well against it. However, if you filter out all the games, including players rated 2000 and below, so if you only keep 2000 plus level players, in that case, white scores extremely well against black. So that tells me that this variation is very potent if you know what you are doing in the white pieces. Now, there are two main ways to handle this position. One is to take on e4. Let me just show you. Take on e4 and go into the queen trade line. This is the main line. However, there is another way to handle this, and it's to kind of decline this endgame offer and play a move like g6. We will discuss both. Firstly, let's start with d takes e4. So let's accept and the endgame offer by white. After d takes e4, we go queen takes d1, king takes d1, and here in this position, there are many ways black can set up. I will start by showing you what white's main ideas are, and to illustrate white's main ideas, I will start by discussing the bishop g4 line, because this looks like the most natural move, or one of the most natural moves. And here what white plays is bishop to e2, stopping the pin, knight f6, knight d2, knight d7, so very natural development. Here white plays this move, knight to e1. Now the idea here is that after knight e1, white will eventually go knight to d3, and from here white will push a4, a5, and try to play on this side of the board, pressuring over here, maybe knight b3 in some lines. This is what white wants. White wants the knight on d3, and perhaps in the future this might even go to c5. Or just simply disallow this knight to go to c5 and attack the pawn on e4. So in this position, black takes on e2, white takes with the king, and knight c5 should be played. You need to play fast here. You cannot play slowly, because if you don't play knight c5 and if you play a move like e6, for example, white can already play knight d3, white can also play a4 here, and you are wasting a lot of time, because now, you can play knight c5 now, but after f3, you need to, react to this a4 pawn push. If you don't, if you go like bishop to e7, then you get kicked out with b4. And white expands a lot, and this is getting quite dangerous already. So the best way to play is to go knight c5 right away, attacking the pawn on e4. f3 should be played, and g6. Remember this g6 setup, because this is the setup that you will be employing in every single variation, almost every single variation, and in my opinion, it is the best way to set up with black. So g6, after a4, we can meet this with a5, but we also can just continue with bishop to g7, knight d3, we capture, white captures with the pawn, we go knight f to d7 now, because we want to open our bishop up, and also we want to remaneuver this knight to either c5 or e5 in the future, also a typical idea in this opening. And after knight b3, we can castle queenside and continue playing like this. This is equal. Computer says that it could be very slightly better for white, but ultimately this is an equal position, and black, I would say, is quite active here. Okay, so going back to this position right here after the queen trade, there are two more variations that I want to discuss. The first one is knight to f6, which is probably the most natural move. And after knight to d2, we play g6 quickly. So instead of going bishop g4 first and going for that exchange, we go for knight f6, g6. And here, knight e5 can be played. Now, knight e5 is very similar to knight e1. However, the advantage of knight e5 is that not only it can be rerouted to d3, but also it's pressuring the pawn on f7. So bishop to c4 and the knight on e5 will team up and attack f7. So we can go bishop to h6 here, developing the bishop, pawn to f3, developing the bishop and also threatening to win a pawn, by the way. f3, bishop to e6, stopping bishop c4, but white goes bishop c4 anyways. And after knight b to d7, white has to take on d7. If white takes on c4, now we can take the knight. We don't take the bishop, we take the knight because we don't want to damage our structure. And here, black is doing very well. So after knight d7, we take with the king, and we go into this line, which is very much equal. I would even argue it might be slightly better for black, but it's probably not enough to win the game. I would argue it's better for black because black's king is just a little bit more active. However, you still need to, play the game out, and this is not like objectively better. It's better practically, in my opinion. And the way you should set up this position is you should play c5 and you should remaneuver this knight to a d7, e5, and c6. So that is the maneuver that we will employ here. Of course, we need to move the rook after bishop c3, rook d8, but the idea remains the same. We want to remaneuver our knight to c6. This is the best square. We're controlling b4, we're controlling d4, and we are generally doing quite well. So this is the variation that I want to show you. I'm not gonna get more in depth. You can analyze this position on your own. So one more line that I want to show you after a king takes d1 is this move, pawn to a5. Now this is not a theoretical move. Actually, it's very funny. Almost every single move in this position, even f6, has been played by masters, but interestingly enough, a5 has never been played. However, I think that this a5 move is a very interesting weapon to employ against this setup. And the idea is that you are expanding, so you want to play a5, a4. If you guys remember the advanced variation where we went knight d7 and a5 quickly, the idea is very similar. You want to push this pawn to a4 and perhaps even expand with b5 at some point. So bishop to e3 should be played. We go a4, so we continue pushing this pawn. And the idea is the same. We go g6, and we want to team up the bishop on the diagonal and the pawn but by playing a3. So we want to team these guys up, and we want to pressure the diagonal. And I think this is probably one of the most interesting ways to handle this position. And it is also backed up by the engine. So the computer really likes this as well. So let me just show you a sample line. We play a3 here, king c2 takes, king takes, and here we play bishop to h6, trying to trade the bishop off now because the king arrived on b2 and now it's going to be very difficult to win the pawn on c3. However, we do have a better structure, and if we trade the bishops off, we are going to get a very good square on c5. So that's the line that I wanted to show you. One more sideline here, one more idea I should say. After you play g6, this is assuming that white plays bishop to e3. If you play g6 here, there's this move bishop to d4, which is quite strong. However, you can reply to this with just simply knight to f6 and let's say bishop to d3. You just go bishop g7 and you're doing fine here. So nothing to worry about. So this is just one thing that I wanted to show. Okay, now let's move on to the next line. And let's actually go back to this position right here. Here, as I mentioned earlier, there is another way to play other than taking on e4 and accepting the queen trade. You can play this move g6. And what g6 does is it is keeping the queens on the board. It is also inviting white to play e5, which is the best move here. The best move by white is to play e5 and no longer allow this queen trade. We go bishop g7, white plays d4, and here you have to know this move. You have to play f6 because this structure here is blunting the bishop on g7. You need to break out and you need to pressure the center right away. So after e takes f6 here, there's two ways to continue. There's knight takes and also pawn takes is quite good. Let me show you pawn takes first because I think this is very interesting. After bishop e2, bishop to e6, castles. This is just a sample line. You guys don't need to know these sidelines in this much detail, but it's still something to keep in mind. And we castle, and this is how we set up this position. Just something like this. And this is very much equal for the black pieces. However, there is another way to take the pawn on f6 that's good, and that is knight takes f6 right here. And after bishop to e2, here we castle, and we need to play c5 quickly. Many strong players have played this position. Even Hans Niemann has played this position with the black pieces. So this variation is definitely still known. And after d takes c5, we go knight to c6, and what we do is we gambit this pawn on c5. However, we push the pawn to e5, and we play on compensation here. Bishop g4, a knight to d2, and we go e4, and we get into this position. Let's say after knight d4, we play queen d7. And this, to me, looks very nice for well, not nice, but playable for both sides. The computer suggests that after knight to b3, so knight 2 to b3, white might be slightly better. However, there is a lot of venom in this position because you can already take the bishop on e2, and after queen takes e2, you can already play moves like knight e5 and take control over the light squares here. This is not the best way to play right now because apparently there is f4. However, this is one of the ways to play, and it is very dangerous to handle this with the white pieces. Even though you're up a pawn, you need to be precise because you have a lot of weaknesses. Okay, so that's going to be it for today's lesson. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and if you did, please like and subscribe. We're trying to grow the channel here, and I would like you guys to be part of that journey. So I will see you next time, and have a great day.